Hello, everyone. Welcome to Through a Therapist's Eyes. I am Chris Gazdick, a mental health and substance abuse therapist. Have a book out, available around the world, actually. Rediscovering Emotions and Becoming Your Best Self. So we welcome you to Through a Therapist's Eyes, the podcast where you get personal insights directly from a therapist in your own home or personal time in your car. This is where we invite you to see the world through the lens of a therapist, but being aware it's not the delivery of therapy services. And help us out. We had a mystery voice last week. That was kind of cool. That was off the cuff, wasn't it?
It was.
So we had the mystery voice to get your attention, to help us. We really find that a lot of people don't understand the way podcasts work. It really helps us out when you subscribe to the show. You get those automatic downloads. And really, particularly on Apple iTunes, if that's your platform of choice, hitting the 5 stars, again, never the 3 stars. If you need to do a 4-star, you could do that. Death be upon us with a 2-star or a 1-star. But no, seriously, hit that 5-star review. Actually type in there, the comments. They have places to offer your enjoyment for the show. That really, really does help us out a lot. We also got more action on the content or the contact through a therapist's.com, where you can ask us questions, interact with us, or just make a comment, get some comments on the website. We're going to go through one today, actually. Kind of excited about that. And all the social media platforms we go on, I give you a personal response, and we get to interact that way, so we're enjoying that. Matthew, this is the human emotional experience. Would you be interested to figure this thing out together?
Let's problem solve together.
You can't say no, right?
I can. I'm here. I'm in.
Matthew Hank's been hanging out with us for this month. HanksRealty.com.
HanksRealtyGroup.com.
Neil, gosh, man, he's going to kill me. HanksRealty.com, MatthewHanks.com. You got places to go, places to catch people on. We really appreciate you hanging out with us this month. I think, did you get that email today, actually? So this is the last week for you.
Yes.
And you'll be back, in a few months or so down the road. But seriously, love having you here. This guest co-host thing, if you've been following the show, we've been doing a different format. Craig's doing his coaching stuff. And how will they find you? You do awesome realty services. Give them that plug, that Skip.
Okay. Here in the Gaston County area, but we have associates around the world, no matter where you're tuning in from. You can find us at MatthewHanks.com. That's all my social media links. MatthewHanks.com. And our company here in Gaston is HanksRealtyGroup.com. We're over on New Hope Road, if you happen to be from the area.
I'll get it right next time.
Understood. They'll find us anyway. Google us if you can't find us any other way.
In today's day and age, you got so many passwords and so many websites and so many handles, and I appreciate Neil so much for all that. He tells me, go ahead, do this post and everything. And then he goes in like Craig did used to, and he edits it and he makes it right. And what would the world be like without editors, man?
World of hurt.
Especially in my world. Okay, so listen, we're going to talk about this idea that I have. I kind of wanted to do a show on a specific diagnosis called acute stress disorder, but I didn't want to make it just a diagnostic show per se. I want, as I always do with shows. I mean, you can go on our website and you can type in a topic, right, and you'll get a lot of information on substance abuse, and we've got a lot of content now. It's really cool, but I really do our shows in a way where, particularly to understand something, but also to realize when you have a specific diagnosis show like today is kind of going to be, this absolutely applies to other people, to all of us. I mean, it's a human emotional experience, right? And we're figuring it out. And so really, when you look at something like specific acute stress disorder, which we're going to talk about tonight, the title, right? What did I put it? How do dramatic life events affect us? Because that's what an acute stress disorder kind of really is. And as with most things that we're dealing with in the mental health field, they're on a continuum. And we're starting with the new, books that came out and the new trainings that we have. There's much more of a focus on that. So the autism spectrum, for instance, it's a spectrum. It's a continuum. You can have autism and have it be really severe, which is one presentation, and really just mild, which is actually almost Asperger's disorder, right? That's a very different perspective or presentation. And so, as with anything, when you have trauma, you'll experience it rather dramatically or really just very simply. And we're all on, most all, honestly, of those spectrums. That's a bold statement. But pretty much we really are on all of these spectrums because they're just emotions moving around on us. What's that? How's that statement hit you, man? I'm curious. We are all on the spectrums of most all diagnostics. Does that sound crazy?
I don't know if I've ever considered it in that way, but you're the professional. I'll go with it.
Right?
We're all on the spectrum.
Well, in a way, that's one of the ways that I've kind of worked. I like what I do for a living, and I really have spent many, many years now putting myself in people's shoes. And, that's just part of my personality, I think, but it's also a purposeful intention because, when people are coming into my therapy office, I'm just human. People put me on a pedestal. Please don't do that. I'm just a human experiencing emotions, and I've been able to really identify what it's like to even be schizophrenic, and what must that experience be like. So anyway, I'm on a little soapbox with that, but I guess the main point there is on all these different topics, you can find, because of the way I want to present them and talk about them, ways that they really do apply to you, ourselves. So it's a side note. So what we're going to do today is we are going to talk about that topic, but I wanted to spend a little bit of time today also on a comment that we got on the website. And it relates to problem solving, but I want to revisit a guest's information that we had on the show, Dr. Ted Spickler. He was awesome. And that was actually episode, well, I'll get to it, 58 and 59. He talked about it. Tacit knowledge is crazy. Matthew, are you ready to get your thinking cap on tonight, man?
I'm ready.
Because seriously, man, I'm getting a little theoretical tonight. We're going to cover a couple things that are just like, I think they're going to blow your mind, the way I'm thinking about these things. And a little bit is theoretical and just the way that I've experienced people with their emotions. So got that all set up. So let's go to the very cool Cass. Hey there. Hope you're doing well, by the way. She posted it on the website. And as I'm doing with some of these social media platforms, man, guys, really, I meant what I said. Post it. Talk to us. We'll interact. And people ask great questions and make great statements. And from time to time, I'm going to use those. So she says in episode 60, she was listening to problem-solving skills. And that was a fun one to do. Neil, you weren't even around then, were you? Yeah, he shakes his head no. That was a fun topic that we did with Craig, because that's a really applicable show that we're all doing like all the time, problem-solving and figuring things out. And so we talked a lot. We went in deep on that and kind of how that goes. So she says, quote, seems to me that problem-solving can be an everyday occurrence in some fashion. Exactly the way I saw it. If it can't be solved by you or with a trusted friend or family member, it should go to a trained therapist. Now, I stopped there. Of course, consider the source. I'm going to agree with that, right? But here's where it got interesting. And this triggered my thoughts to go on a little bit of a journey. And this is where I want your thinking cap. This is the first of two thinking cap areas, right?
Okay.
So she said some problems you can walk away from and return to. And for others, you can sleep on it and the answer comes. Both good alternative help, or both are good alternatives that helps, but not always effective for the long lasting. Put a note there. She finishes up. That's where the insight and knowledge of a therapist can help the most. We cannot always see what we see, so we have limits. And I think that's true. That's part of what helps in a therapy environment. What we do in this room, which is cool. We got the cameras. This is the real room where it happens, right? So, people are walking through problems and thinking through things, and we do a lot of the problem solving, shaking out the barriers that we have and the emotional impacts and stuff that we have going on. So we do that a lot right here. But it's interesting the way that she put that when you sleep on something or when you are trying to problem solve, it's not long lasting. And I'm not exactly sure what she meant by that. But Cass, I think I would very much disagree with you on that part of the point. And here's a little bit why. So let me dig into your mind and what you hear first, Matthew, when you're problem solving, right? And you know how you have that experience. You're working on a difficult problem, trying to figure out a strategy or something. You set it down and you come back and what happens?
Fresh mind.
Right?
Fresh solutions, possibly.
Right? Sometimes that problem just works itself out. Mm-hmm. It's like, bang, it just comes to you. You've had that experience, right?
Yes.
Is that long-lasting or not? And so I'm not exactly sure what she meant by that part,
mm-hmm.
but...
What do you mean by long-lasting?
Let's try to figure out what she meant together, because I feel like she's thinking... deeper problems or psychological experiences and that type of self-exploration you might really be blinded by. And so I think that's what she was thinking.
Okay.
But when you're problem solving, and we went deep on it in that episode 60, I didn't realize she was listening to one. Oh my God, that was right after Dr. Spickler's episodes, episode 58 and 59. I probably was really on that thought process, because I'm telling you, those two shows, Matthew, you should listen to those, 58 and 59, because what he was talking about was absolutely fascinating. Book is right there on my bookshelf. And he talked about tacitly understanding something. And this is a huge part of our everyday emotional experience that doesn't necessarily last long in self-exploration emotionally. But when you're talking about problem solving, it lasts forever, because the brain solves problems for you. Does that sound weird?
A little.
The brain solves problems for you is some of what I learned from him. So let me go a little further and check this out. So basically, it's so hard to kind of surmise. I mean, you need to listen to those episodes to get the full idea. But I want to highlight his book again, Gaining Insight Through Tacit Knowledge. If you read that book, you will begin to really understand and unlock the power of what your, I might almost say, psychology has to offer you with, get this, any problem in life that you have. Are you interested yet to find out how your brain solves problems for you with largely any topic that you prioritize? Does that sound interesting?
Let's do it. Let's research it.
It's crazy to think that your brain has the ability to do that. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. Have you had problems that are sticky problems that you haven't been able to figure out?
I have.
Right? Subconsciously, what your brain is doing, that he very easily, in a very easy to understand manner, described developing and being purposeful about having and creating tacit understanding, tacit knowledge of what's going on. So with any problem. So he talked about tacitly understanding things and applying the problem solving, which contradicted Cass a little bit. So if I'm trying to be really brief here, so bear with me. If you think of, do you know how to make an omelet? Are you good at making an omelet?
Yes.
Okay, so you know the process.
Yes.
Do you think you could tell Neil with a step-by-step description of how to make an omelet and then have him directly make an omelet as good or better than you can?
Close, yes.
You think you could do that
I
closely?
can give him a step-by-step instruction list, yes.
Okay. I'm going to submit to you that Neil is going to listen to those step-by-step, very detailed instructions, and he is going to struggle greatly to do that. He's going to have a hard time with the edges, making the omelet, getting that solid, shaking it, how you move it. Chopping onions, you can figure that out, but putting the ingredients together and trying to understand and automatically go through the process that you do automatically, I would bet that you wouldn't even be able to give detailed enough step-by-step instructions, because you're going to assume a lot of the steps and not even put them on a paper. Let me switch and say riding a bike. We probably all three know how to ride a bike. Same thing. We all three have kids as well. And we probably all three have done this. Teaching your kid to ride a bike. Were you able to do that verbally?
No way.
Manual?
No way.
Step-by-step detailed instructions. Why is that? What has to happen for that kid to be able to ride a bike?
They have to learn for themselves.
Okay. How are they learning? What's happening in their brain? That's the fascinating part, right? The brain is taking everything it sees. The brain is taking everything now. I don't like those words every time, but it fits here. It's taking everything it sees, everything it hears, everything it smells, everything it feels, everything it tastes. And it's using all of those senses to gain tacitly an understanding of the event or the thing that you're trying to do. And it does that when you're not even thinking about it. That's what's amazing. You're constantly learning and constantly pulling in information. And so what has to happen is, and here's the key from what I learned from Dr. Spickler, you have got to experience making an omelet. You have to experience riding a bike. And then your body works it out. Your brain specifically works it out. And voila. That's why you put your project down, go away, come back, and then what happened?
You've made a big, giant step towards a solution or
How
knowing
did
how
that
to do
happen?
something.
How and when did that happen? That's what's... I have applied this to so many things in my therapy practice, really and truly. You just are automatically going through your day, feeling emotions and going through things and dealing with stuff. And all day long and all night long. You like golf. You ever hear of the golfers, how they practice their swing at night when sleeping? You ever heard of that?
No.
Yeah. That's a thing. I forget what it's called, but that's actually a practice strategy that people have visualized. You've heard of visualization in golf, I'm sure.
Yes.
How does that work? Go ahead. How does that work?
Well, just as a strategy, I'm trying to think of who I remember actually went through with his psychologist and developed the strategy to do that. But he made a big stride forward in his golf game. But by the time you hit the shot, you've already hit the shot multiple times.
Almost every single time somebody's on the foul line, I mean, they're sitting there and they are seeing the ball arc the way they want it to arc, go dropping right into the basket in a perfect foul shot. That's what they're doing. I even see the guy. I don't know if you've watched the NBA Finals, man. There's this dude. Oh man, now I forgot his name. The awesome player for the Bucks, the Milwaukee Bucks.
Greek Freak.
What's his name?
The Greek Freak.
Yeah. Oh my God. Is he from Greece? I was wondering
Yes,
that.
he was.
That's awesome.
Yeah, incredible story. If you look him up and
really?
his background, yes.
He seems like a fine young man.
Yeah, I read earlier that him and his brother had to switch shoes. That only one of them could have the shoes on at a time. Family couldn't afford 2 pair of shoes.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Wow. You've intrigued me. See what he does with his hand? Every single time he takes a shot, he does that. He takes his hand, and he just flows like that, and then he gets the ball.
Yeah.
And does a shot. I'm telling you, it is powerful, powerful stuff when you look at what the brain is doing, and we've only begun to begin to figure that stuff out. So pretty cool. I was just reading her comment, and that's what it did in my brain, to take a little journey back to re-highlight something that honestly has added to my therapy skills tremendously. It's one of the reasons why I love doing the show and having guests sometimes, man. I learn so much sometimes doing this show. I learn as much as disseminate information, and that was a good example of it. So thank you, Mr. Ted Spickler. I hope Dr. Spickler is still out there kicking around, figuring out how people can learn through tacit knowledge. So, okay, let's dial into what we're talking about. Where are we at? Acute stress disorder. I'm partly setting this up because I want to get Chris Lowrance back on the show, police officer. We're going to be talking about trauma experiences and things. And this is I think a little less focused on in my field, but something called acute stress disorder. I think of it as PTSD lite. Okay. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about trauma again in upcoming shows. And I thought, what a good way to kind of do a specific show and a diagnosis. We haven't done that in a little while. But this is just about dramatic events that happen to you and what happens psychologically when you go through it. So when I get to the book over here on my right, the DSM, I'm going to fly through it, and it'll be a little didactic, but that's okay because I want to apply it in the way of understanding what happens with your reactions to drama. What happens, Matt? I might say, what do you wonder about when you get to a dramatic situation in your life, and it makes an impact on you? Is there anything that you just off the cuff realize, like, what happens when you have a dramatic life event? Can you imagine where you starting from? Is kind of what I'm curious. Where people would imagine themselves starting from. So, what do you get from that? What happens to you or in you? What happens in you when a dramatic event happens?
I think it makes you search yourself and maybe find out what you're made of a little bit, depending on how dramatic the event is. Kind of takes you back to your roots, to your core. Helps you understand what your value system is. Where do you draw your strength? Where do you find your value, who you are? And, I think about, well, how's that going to affect me going forward? How deep is the scar? Was there a scar, depending on the event, how dramatic it was?
That's an interesting way of putting it. Was there a scar, first off? Oh, that's a really good point.
Mm-hmm.
And how deep was that scar, and what does that do to us?
Mm-hmm.
Here in a little bit, we're going to talk about concussions,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to talk about that especially. So that's a pretty cool thought.
Mm-hmm.
What does concussions have to do with you? I'll leave that as a teaser for just a moment. But
Okay.
yeah, what happens in your experience of it is a little bit more what I'm looking for. You're kind of in a cool way taking, what can I, because I know you, man. You're like, what can I do to learn from this? How am I going to recover from this? What do I take from it? How do I look at myself? Those are cool things. Yeah. But there's actual physiological responses that we all have to situations.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to pull, this is the DSM-5. Getting used to these cameras, I can incorporate that in there, Right, so this is the book that has everything that we diagnose. I mean, look at these pages. You have to read all this and know all this, to get into diagnostics. So this is just a little bit didactic, but this is kind of what we're talking about when we talk about what I like to call as PTSD lite, because it's really, really similar to what you find with PTSD. So first of all, there's an exposure to actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual violation in one or more of the following ways. So you directly experience the traumatic event. You witness in a person things that happen to them. So, you can be a witness. Learning that the events occur to a close family members or a close friend. So even learning about something that happened, right? And then, of course, experiencing repeated or extreme exposure to adverse details of the traumatic event. So somebody tells you multiple times over and over again this horrible thing. It's just, it can mess with you. Mm-hmm. So think about that. You don't even have to experience it.
Yeah.
You hear about it. This can play into your psyche.
Yeah.
So presence of 9 or more of the following symptoms, right? And there's different categories that we look for, and I'm going to try to make this simple and not even going to read the whole thing, but recurrent or involuntary, intrusive, distressing memories. So memories of it pop up. Distressing dreams might occur. We've even had over the world right now with COVID, we've had people documenting a lot of people's experience with dreams of sickness and illnesses, and they don't even know anybody, but they're hearing all the world events. Mm-hmm. So that's how this affects us all. Mm-hmm. Again, remember, we're all on the spectrum. Mm-hmm. Think about that as we go through here. We all experience some of these things, right? Dissociative reactions, so flashbacks, that's where you get the flashback experience, or prolonged psychological distress or physiological reactions, like the internal cues. Your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate changes, whatever. The fifth thing here is negative mood. So you have persistent inability to experience positive emotions. You just, it's that bleak fellow that's, always, the sourpuss or the whatever. Dissociative symptoms. So it's a weird word. Disassociation is when you're driving down the road every day, you go to work, every day you go to work, every day you go to work. Then on the weekend, you want to go to the grocery store and you're driving down going to work, right? That's disassociated. We all disassociate all the time. So, but this is an altered sense, a little bit hopped up disassociation, and an inability to remember important aspects of what happened. Where am I at? Avoidance symptoms. So you'll try to avoid the distressing thoughts, memories, or feelings. You'll avoid the external reminders. So you'll actually avoid people, places, and things. I've had people in the military that they won't go into groups in large like concert halls or around large groups of people because it triggers them, in crowds where they've been in Afghanistan and bombs have gone off and stuff. I mean, that's real, Arousal symptoms, sleep disturbance, irritable behavior, something called hypervigilance, problems with concentration, and then the startle responses. So we're looking for, at least a few of these, and these things last, they exacerbate themselves or end after about a month, is what we look for acute stress disorder. But You'll hear in a story that I'm going to tell about driving in the snow that nothing fits into a nice, neat box. There's so much that you have to work with somebody to see what their experience is, to know if this applies or not. So that's acute stress disorder. You ever hear of any of those things? I'm sure you have a little bit.
Sure.
You know anything about PTSD and those types of experiences people have?
Well, we've studied it pretty in depth in some of the military training we've done because so many of our warriors battle this, particularly as they come back from being downrange and serving our country in wars and so forth. But it is something that affects our soldiers and our military members. And so we have studied that, PTSD. And it sounds like the acute stress disorder we're covering in this show, did you just describe it as a mini version of that?
Yeah.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, if I looked closely, it might even be a lot of the exact same things.
Okay.
Well, it is, actually, but it might be the exact same thing. I'd need to compare it and stuff. But big thing is the duration. So, yeah, it really is. And again, well, I'll make the bold statement that any time that somebody's in a significant event, any theater of war, right, any patrol officer's hall, therapy offices, probably most all therapists hear horrible stories, that can play it with you. You find ways to cope. You manage it. Don't get me wrong, but we are experiencing these experiences. Some of these on this list, probably 100% of the time. It might be just so mild that you never really paid attention to it. And a lot of times it's not mild and you're still not paying attention to it and you don't even know it. That's what drives me crazy. I've talked about that on the show before. I've had people that have had reactions along these lines with this list, fully meeting criteria, never have any. I mean, they would swear to you that it doesn't affect them, right? I mean, it gets us. And I'm kind of dramatically pausing with that because this is going to be the second time that I asked you to put your thinking cap on. Okay, so I'm going to play a video here in a minute. You'll get ready in a second. Because I was really thinking about how I wanted to deal with this issue, and I thought of a metaphor. I love metaphors. And I actually thought I created a term, but I Googled it, and somebody else had the term. The term that I wanted to use was emotional concussions. Okay? Somebody actually beat me to it, and they wrote about it. I've never heard the term before. Have you ever heard of emotional concussions?
Never.
Right. Somebody wrote about it in the context of growing up in an alcoholic dysfunctional family. And I guess they just came to the same metaphor that I did, and they were talking about all of the emotional hits time after time after time that you get. And the question is, what cumulative effect does that have? And that's why I thought about concussions. So did you ever see that movie Concussion, about 2015?
No.
Came out? The NFL movie?
No.
Well, it was a powerful show.
Okay.
And actually covered a lot of my Pittsburgh Steelers guys. That's who created a lot of the, well, I won't say the Pittsburgh Steelers guys created. They got studied. Mikey Webster, he was a wreck. He was a center for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they get pummeled. They're getting concussed constantly. Remember what they used to say to you when you get a concussion in a football game? You know,
Back in the game?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brush it off. You got your bell rung. Dude,
Right.
These guys were getting concussed constantly. Justin Strelzig, another lineman at the same era, he was driving down the highway, died in a fiery car wreck. Like, I remembered these guys. I grew up with these guys. And I found out what was happening with concussions, okay, neurologically, over and over again, getting hit. Listen to this clip of the movie, and he describes what it is that they found.
A human being will get concussed at 60 Gs. A common head-to-head contact on a football field, 100 Gs. God did not intend for us to play football.
Let's keep God out of this.
Okay.
He's being interviewed by, player representatives and stuff.
What are the S's?
The Steelers.
And the O's?
The others, obviously.
Yes, the other team.
Do you even watch football?
No, not at all.
They're picking on him.
But I've been studying Mike Webster's position. The man in the middle is quite deceptively the most violent position on the field. The slaps, the punches, the forearm, it is an unremitting storm of subconcussive blows. The head as a weapon on every single play of every single game, of every single practice from the time he was a little boy to a college man, culminating in an 18-year professional career. By my calculations, Mike Webster sustained more than 70,000 blows to his head.
That crazy?
Now, these men, these are the fastest. Now, their speed multiplied by the speed of the men who hit them, the G-forces generated, equivalent to hitting them on the helmet with a sledgehammer. All of this triggered a cascading series of neurological events which unleashed killer proteins upon Mike Webster's brain. The tangles invading and strangling his mind from the inside out, like pouring wet concrete down kitchen pipes. As it hardens, it chokes the brain.
Killer
leaving him
proteins.
Unrecognizable, even to himself. I don't know football. I've never played. But I am telling you that playing football killed Mike Webster.
It's a crazy cool, powerful clip. What's your brain doing with that? Just curious.
So twice the forces necessary to cause concussion are happening consistently as the players are colliding with one another playing football. How about
Right.
that?
Right.
Yep.
That movie blew me apart when I was watching that. And I'm like I said, I grew up with these guys, man. These guys were in a lot of ways sports heroes to me. I mean, I just and Mike Webster was one of the. He was a badass center. I mean, he was an amazing football player, but we did not know the chronic and constant harm that his body was going through, and the powers to be did not want to really recognize that. And when we began to break through the denial that people have about it, we might get annoyed that your player gets pulled off the field when they're fine and they go in and get those concussion protocols kind of going on, right? Well, stop and think about what they're trying to do is quite literally save this person's life because of the damage that's being done. Okay. How much do you think we know about neurology?
Maybe more than ever, but still a long way to go that we would understand everything.
Right, way long.
Maybe
way to
never.
go. Does your body have to get hit to create? What did he say? I repeated it when he was saying
100
it.
G's?
Huh?
You say 100 G's?
Well, proteins,
Oh, the killer proteins.
right? Did he say killer proteins? Is that what he said?
That's what I understood him to say. Was like liquid cement.
Right? Cortisol flowing through your body, adrenaline pumping chemicals, and neurological process going on. Can you think? Look at the title of the show. Can you think? Hint, what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
Can you think of other life experiences that create those exact same chemicals that are popping through our body when a dramatic life event happens? I answered my own question, right? Are we not experiencing very similar brain processes going on? So follow me with that, right? I'm not saying that concussions are the same thing as emotional experiences. But can we not say that emotional experiences drive the body to create a lot of the same chemicals that are going on at that time as being physically hit essentially by a sledgehammer? Can we not say that?
I'll follow your lead on it. You're the expert.
What says you? We're just talking.
I would say likely that if it's the same chemicals that happen in both instances, then you could expect the same outcome.
Right? I mean, think about it. Yeah, we're experiencing flooded emotions. I mean, even think about just regular fights with your wife, or, my kids can do it for me hardcore. I mean, I feel all of that. Well, what's happening over and over and over again, just in our regular everyday lives, neurologically, with the way that we think, the negativity that we begin to develop? Can we not say that adults are probably more jaded than kids? Can we make that statement?
Sure.
Right? It's not hard to say. Well, why is that? How much experiences have we had in life that creates that negative thought process, that negative exposure to just regular, normal, everyday lives? We get stressed out constantly, right?
Absolutely.
So if you think about emotional concussions, okay, you're not going to get concussed from, emotionally concussed, if you will, from fighting with your kid. Or are you actually? Because I wouldn't think you're getting emotionally or physically concussed from. I mean, you've seen linemen. I mean, they're popping their hits and they're getting their angles, and and I mean, those are all hits, little ones. I've never seen anybody getting taken out of game from a punch move on a lineman. That's what they do. They punch, they get them out, and they angle in to get the quarterback. Never seen anybody taken out of the game just for that. Do you think that hurts?
Never played football, but I imagine it does.
This guy is saying that is equivalent of, what did he say, like 70,000 hits that this player over 18-year career has taken. If you've been alive for 18 years, how many emotional hits have you had?
Yeah.
I'm just saying. We're just talking.
Yeah.
We're just thinking. A little bit of this is theoretical right here. But that's a lot of emotional hits. And our bodies are feeling it. Our emotions are developing patterns, life patterns. And our thinking patterns are being solidified. We know that neuron processing kind of gets layered upon layer upon layer. And as it gets layered, back to that tacit knowledge, right? Because if you're tacitly learning something negative, you're experiencing life constantly negative. I mean, it'll blow your brain apart if you really, really dive into it, right?
Well, mindset's so important. I mean, it really is, and that's part of it.
Yeah, and I know we talk about that in our mastermind group and stuff. And we look at success manuals and talk about business practices and all of these things. One of the things I think our group misses, that I think about sometimes is, well, what happens when that's done to you over and over again? That's where people, like, well, all right, well, you got your bell rung. It was a stressful event. Like you did when I asked you when we opened up, right? Well, what can you learn from that? Well, that's a good question. How does that affect you? What can you learn about yourself, and how can you improve? Don't ever stay down. It's how you get up. We have these phrases. When you get knocked down, what are you supposed to do?
Get back up again.
Right? Keep fighting. One small step. Continue to be persistent on your goals. Write your goals down. I mean, these are all great things. Don't get me wrong. But my point here is, when it's happening to you, you are constantly getting hit directly away from that. And we'll talk about some examples of that's hard to combat. That's hard to confront. That's hard to push through when your emotions are driving a completely different neurological direction. So I just want us to think about it, be aware of it, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to manage dramatic events in your life and what that does to you. But back to your scarring comment, there are scars left. How do you manage those scars? That begins to be important. You can see where I'm going. Because if you don't even know that you're scarred, and that was one of your statements, right? When you don't even know you're scarred, how do you deal with that? Now somebody tells you, well, write down your goal. Dude, my goal is to, get to tomorrow. My goal is to just keep my job, My goal is to just stay married. Just, if I can just get that together. If I could just get those kids to graduate high school, that's my goal, right? Not to make $1 million, not to, you know what I mean? I mean, let's get day to day with this and understand what people are experiencing. So I want to go through some examples of stories and situations with all that kind of theory as it goes. Yeah, and we got some cool links. Neil, how are we doing with the show notes? Do we get those on there? I mean, so these articles will be on the website. Yep, and you can click on them and go deeper into it and see some of the things that But before I go to some of those examples, I did have a conversation with precepting a physician assistant another go around, and I was talking about it with her from a medical perspective, and she kind of did. She kind of confirmed, it was like, look, we don't think we know a lot of how this goes. She was kind of like, wow, emotional concussions, that's a neat concept. We did this together in my show preps, where it kind of came from, but we just don't know neurologically. That's what she landed on. I think she's right. So what kind of situations, Matthew, might you imagine? I feel like I'm talking too much. I'm also getting dry mouth. It's tough. What kind of situations and examples would you imagine people kind of getting into that cause these dramatic bigger type of emotional concussions? I mean, your military experience for sure. Anything else come to mind, or have you been through a story that's a dramatic life event?
Well, I'm thinking about the major stressors in life. If you go through a bankruptcy or a
Oh, that's a good one.
foreclosure, business goes under, lose a parent, lose a child, lose a spouse, things like that.
Yeah, those are yeah, absolutely. I mean,
The major stressors, that you come away and you'll just never be the same again.
you know what I like to call those? You're right. Any before and after life event. And the first major one we have in life oftentimes is high school graduation. That is a before and after life event.
Yeah.
Can we say that we can even get somewhat emotionally concussed with positive events? It's things that we choose. Were you the same day before you got married as after you got married?
No, very different.
Right. Talk about a concussion, right?
The bomb went off.
For real.
Yeah.
It's a great event. It's beautiful, but man, you're just like,
Yeah.
what ran over me right here?
Life changes drastically.
Life changes drastically. So I got one that's a perfect example. Where we at on time? That I'll go through. I'll just, instead of asking you, check this out and check what my experience was, right? So we had a funeral in our family that we had to get to. So we live in North Carolina. We were going to Kentucky. And this is a fun story to tell because, dude, I've talked about it with you guys. I like, where I'm from, right?
That's right. West Virginia.
Right. And up in West Virginia when I was younger, especially, we got more snow, global warming or whatever's going on. It seems like it doesn't snow even in West Virginia as much. But I would remember, like, you'd get snow somewhere in December and you wouldn't see the grass again, for forever. So I grew up, and when I started learning how to drive, man, I enjoy driving in the snow.
Okay.
It's a blast. It still snows around here every now and again. I'll take my Jeep out and I'm spinning around, and it's a blast for me.
Yeah.
So on this particular trip, my in-laws came up from Florida, and they left early in the morning. We wanted to get an extra day of work in, and so we were going to leave that evening. But there was a big snowstorm. And I'm like, that's cool. I got it, man. This is going to be fun. So we get in the car, and I didn't know that it was the snowstorm. I mean, it was huge. You might even remember it, Matthew, probably about 7 years ago or so. We had a terribly bad storm, and I tell you, we got on the highway, and we got up off of 485 and started going north on 77. Time we hit outside of the Beltway of Charlotte, dude, it was pounding snow. And it was like, and I'm going like this. I'm just, the ice. And I'm like, I'm still not freaked out. It's fine. It's great because I'm enjoying myself. I'm concentrated.
Yeah.
But you couldn't go more than 45 miles an hour. Well, you know how we're leaving the state and we go up to Virginia, that highway,
Oh, yes.
right?
Yeah.
It's pretty steep, isn't it?
Big time.
You know how you fishtail and you spin your tires and in the snow, you can't get up to the top of the hill? It was snowing so bad, I was afraid I wouldn't be able to get out of the state. I started to get concerned, like, I don't know if I can get out, So, and I fishtailed her once real good. Wife starts freaking out. I mean, she's tense and anxious. I got 2 kids in the back of the car. We get up to the top where, wherever that town is around Fancy Gap and stuff, and we go a little further. Dude, wreck after wreck, stop traffic. I mean, it was just, I was starting to get like, wow. So finally, we're approaching Waynesville. Is that right? Waynesville up there?
Right.
Yeah, right. And I'm like, okay, honey, we'll get off the road. We'll take a break. We need a break. We're hours in, many hours to get to there. And no vacancies. Go a little further, no vacancies. Finally, I get to Waynesville, and I'm like,
I think it's Wistful.
Wistful, you're right.
Yeah, Waynesville's out near Asheville.
Right, okay, Wistful, you're right. Like, that exit, there's like 7, 8 hotels. None of them had vacancies.
Right.
Everybody's off the road. Park in the Holiday parking lot. We'll take a break. I mean, we'll rest. I wasn't resting. So an hour later, I'm like, well, might as well drive. So I get back on. Now we're in traffic. It continued snowing the whole time.
Wow.
I'm literally beginning to think, okay, I got leftover chicken nuggets in the car. I got some French fries. We got plenty of water from the snow. We can just pack it in the back. We'll watch a movie. We got blankets. I always drive with a blanket because I am from West Virginia. I'm literally like tripping, like managing what felt life and death. I can even feel it again when I give this story in as much detail as I am, and I'm doing that for a reason. So go a little bit further, And I'm just beginning to think like this isn't going to work. And I never give up a trip. I do not give up to the snow. But I looked over at her, and she started crying, and because we needed to get to the funeral. It was a very important funeral. And I said, honey, I just don't think I can get us there. And we did. I made the decision. We turned the car around, and incidentally, driving southbound was actually pretty clear. It took me 2 hours to get home. Do you know how many hours it took me to get to Wytheville, Virginia? I'm saying that right? What is it normally, about 2.5, 3 hours?
Right. Should be.
22 hours. Right? They can't hear you, but you can see on the camera's face. Like, dude.
Yeah.
I'm 22 hours in taking inventory on chicken nuggets and stuff. So that was a harrowing life experience. And the interesting part of this is a month later, I got a funeral in my family. And I want to go up to the funeral. First of all, she ain't getting in the car. She's like, yo, I'm not going. She's checked out. I'm not doing that again. We had a little bit of a fight about taking the kids because I wanted to take the kids. And, so I took the kids up there, much to her chagrin. She was not happy with me. It was a tough time. But, Matthew, I got in the car, and don't you know it was snowing?
Not again.
Right? Now, this snow is nothing. This was my normal, it's snowing, this is fun. Wasn't even sticking a lot. I was freaking out. My blood pressure was up, my heart rate was up, and I remember very distinctly sitting there thinking, what is going on with me? I know I love driving in the snow, but I almost had to pull over. That's how much it started to get to me. Mm-hmm. So incidentally, what I did is a lot of what we've talked about on the show. I did some breathing. I turned the music on. And so I focused on the music, and I literally told myself safety statements. Wait a minute, you know how to drive in snow. You know what you're doing. You've always been very confident with this. You're going to be okay. This is safe. Nothing's likely to happen. I repeated those to myself. And don't you know, it took me about 20 good minutes to okay, well, wait a minute. This is cool. And then I had fun again.
Yeah.
How do you hear that story, and what does that do in your thoughts? Because I'm going to submit to you, I had acute stress disorder right then and there.
Yeah.
Hey, what do you think? What are you hearing?
Well, to me, it goes back to the scar or the memories that you have, because you'll probably never drive in the snow without having some type of flashback or thought of that experience when your life, and not just you, your entire family.
Oh, my gosh, yeah.
On the line. And the uncertainty that experience brought for you and your family. But after that, thinking everything changes on every trip, much less if there's snow involved.
Right.
And then the second one was a funeral again. So it was bringing it all back.
Right.
So, but a lot of folks on the road, if you drive long enough, you're going to have the near-death experiences, the close calls, the things that happen. I feel like grateful to even survive that.
Right.
And it will affect you. How many people, plenty of folks won't get on the interstate at all.
They won't.
They just will not get on the interstate. You have to give them directions. It can't involve an interstate. They just won't do it.
Have you seen that with reality? And
yes.
People kind of getting directions?
Yes.
Really? You've seen that notably? Yeah.
It happens from time to time. But, I look at that and say, well, something must have happened at some point in the past, and that scarred them. I tell you, one thing about real estate is we got an invite over to a friend's place, and they're on the 50th story, way up, and a fear of heights from someone they couldn't go.
Yeah.
I said, I cannot go, couldn't visit them. But it was something related to something in the past. So it scarred them just then. Earlier today, I was at a doctor's appointment, and they were sending me for an MRI, and they said, are you in any way claustrophobic? Yeah. So I thought, well, there you go. That could be something that could affect someone's medical attention that they get just over a scar that they've had in their past somehow.
Absolutely. Medical events are a big source of trauma. Mm-hmm. Medical professionals don't realize it, but they're getting smart to it. That's why they never used to ask that question. Mm-hmm. And you know why they ask that question now? Because they got people going into those machines freaking the hell out.
Yeah.
They can't. They're freaking out. They're losing their cool and getting violent.
Yeah. I said, I guess I'm about to find out.
Yeah. And I just look at my own life, which I think is a fairly normal life. I'll eat those words, I'm sure, by all my family and friends. But, I came home from a training one day. I've used that in prior shows as an example of observing a car that was on its roof and wheels still spinning when we pulled up to the scene. I was all kind of triggered. And here's foreshadowing. And I went home and I told my story. Right?
Yeah.
When you experience something,
Yeah.
what do you do with family and friends and people? Right?
You want to tell the story?
Right?
Yeah.
What does that do?
I was attacked
Yeah,
by
go
a
ahead.
dog when I was younger. I was
You were what?
attacked by a dog.
Oh, yeah.
A German Shepherd came up in the yard, and I was trying to protect my sister, and so had a stick, was trying to keep the dog off my sister, and he attacked, and I've got the scars to prove it on my right arm.
Oh, wow.
And,
yeah, there they are right there.
And I'm not a big dog fan today.
Yeah.
Because of it, and I had to go to therapy over it.
Yeah, really.
It affected me that bad. All dogs got lumped in because of that dog.
Remember, okay, gosh, thank you for that, right? You've got the concussions with the killer proteins and the adrenaline and the cortisol and the neuroprocessing that goes on. That layers. And so when you experience an experience similar to that, your body knows what to do tacitly in a negative way. It has learned what to do when your eyes, because it's already learned about what you've seen and what's going to happen. Your brain sees the dog and it knows you're going to be almost killed. And that sounds dramatic, but that's literally what your brain is doing. It's layered it. And those chemicals shoot. That experience reinvigorates. If you were around my buddy Joe, who's got a German Shepherd, I'll pay attention to that in the future if you're ever hanging out, right? Like that can, right? That's the emotional concussion protocol. Now, the good news is you can do something about this. Does that sound interesting? What can you do to recover from this, right? So let's transition to that a little bit. We're real quick. I think we've kind of talked about it a little bit, as we went along here. But let me see. Yeah, I had a medical event. Part of what happened here, I was reminded of this with a client that I saw recently. As part of the generation of this show as well. It was like screaming acute stress response to me. Actually, quite possibly PTSD. But it was he had a similar experience with his with a family member. I got to be careful about that, but confidentiality and all. But it reminded me of my sister had a seizure when we were a kid. I mean, she was a baby in a high chair. Dude, she seized out. 911 came, and it was scary. So these situations, I think we did, like I said, a good job of describing these. But remember when I was talking about the chronic events, that when you're in a situation in life where you have chronic rehappenings, we've talked about police work. That's huge in first response. We talked about military experiences. I know there's a lot, you correct me if I'm wrong, I ain't been there, but I think I know that there's a lot of downtime in military time, a lot of times when you're in theater, right?
Oftentimes there is.
Yeah.
Not always, but there can be.
Can be a lot of boredom and stuff, but when you have an event one day, 3 days later, a week later, 2 days later, 2 weeks later, how many events is that? That's chronic.
Yeah.
That's chronic. ACOA folks, adult children of alcoholics. That's with the article that somebody actually wrote about my concept. I can't say my concept. Dang it. I thought that was a really good one. And then she wrote about it. Emotional concussions happen when you're dealing with dysfunctional family systems. Constantly fighting, constantly not knowing what to expect. An alcoholic parent, you don't want to bring your friends over to the house. Talk about chronicity. How about your entire childhood? Right?
Right.
Healthcare workers, we regularly are told in trainings, we call it now compassion fatigue. It used to be called burnout. You go to your corporate trainings, they'll talk to you about burnout. Well, how many stressful times have you had in the realty market? 2008.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a stressful event.
You're right?
Yeah.
Religious cults. We talked about that on the show. When you're chronically engaged in really destructive religious structures. How about homelessness? Here's a tip. We're going to talk about that next week, actually. You mentioned bankruptcy. How about poverty? think about the applications of this to what people's experiences are when you have any kind of disadvantage like that. Sexual abuse that happens in a family, that may happen once. How many times do you think the lies come from that? Over and over and over again. You see the chronic nature and what sometimes we're dealing with. So again, we're just talking about how these things operate. Acute stress disorder is a real thing. How are we all on that spectrum? And I love your point of, is there scarring? Chances are there are when you ask that question.
Mm-hmm.
How deep does it go? And then what do we do about it?
Mm-hmm.
That's really what we want to get at. Okay. What do we do about it? How do we manage the stress? Anything that goes through your mind, Matthew, I'm curious where you're at and questions and thoughts that you have of what people might be hearing. You know, how do we get to deal with this, and what's your brain doing? Can I check in with you?
Yeah, on managing the stress or what to do about it.
Yeah, and how is this hitting home with like how regularly this happens, and you know what that does in your brain thinking right now, like, you know.
Yeah.
You getting it?
I think that there's probably, as we talked about, how many things, important things that can happen, significant events in life that can happen that can cause the stress. How many folks may feel this or be going through this, maybe not even realizing it. So they have effects going on in their life, and they don't even realize it's something that is diagnosable, something that is treatable, or things that they could work through if they had the appropriate help. Maybe somebody in your field could walk them through this.
Right.
So the first step would be acknowledging that, yes, you have it, and there's a way through it, and how is that affecting your day-to-day?
Right.
And I bet there's a lot of people that don't even realize it.
And that's why I wanted to check in with your brain and thought as you're saying that. I'm like, did you realize even before this conversation how much that might be going on?
Mm-hmm.
Or is that new to you? Because I know you're thoughtful about these things too.
Yeah, well, it's funny, the dog experience.
Right.
You know, I think about that, and I have memories of that even though I was very, very young.
Yeah.
But I've not thought about that in years.
Right. Yeah.
And we just had a dog last year in our family. We experienced a loss of a family member, and we decided to get a dog. And we thought that could be something that takes our mind off for the kids and everything.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
And so, but it did not work well. We realized that we are not a dog family,
Really?
and we had to rehome the animal. But
Okay.
it just makes me wonder, though, how much of the experience that I had in the past did that come back that I just did not care for having that dog around.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think that's a bit of a courageous moment, and I want to appreciate you for that because that demonstrates it perfectly. And I'm glad that I'm getting your brain to go around, and I wonder how many people are driving around and thinking of this because those things are very real. And you're telling me now you didn't even realize that might have been a component for.
I'm saying it could have been, but I just remember when we're talking about stressful events and things like that. But I remember now I did have therapy over that.
Yeah.
About the dog to try to work through it because, the animal was bigger than I was probably at that point.
Right.
Runs up in the yard and just grabbed me by the arm and was flinging me around like a rag doll.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that sounds terrifying.
I had to have stitches in my arm and everything. So.
Yeah, I mean, and the power of what you're saying right there is, again, the tacitly understanding that your brain develops and you haven't even thought about it for years, you just said.
Had the dog last year, so of course I'm thinking about that, but not that had happened way in my past.
And how automatic it still is.
It is.
Or can be.
We're talking, that's 35 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, you're not a spring chicken
No,
anymore, buddy.
we're talking many decades.
Yeah, a few decades ago. And I see that, though, in therapy with people. I mean, they're amazed that when I bring up and talk about these things, and then you get into a little bit of the detail, and here's another little bit of foreshadowing, the story of what happens, and you begin dealing with it. So there is hope. We do deal with this stuff. There's actually something called constructivist theory. So constructivism is something that we deal with. It's just one of the many therapy modalities that we go into. Everyone knows cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Well, there's other things that we learn about. Constructivist is kind of cool component of that. It views the person in treatment as the agent of change. It can be considered more of a philosophy, an understanding, that tacitly, emotionally understanding things. Again, it comes up. I'm telling you, Dr. Ted Spickler, he helped me so much. It's amazing what he did. Episode 58 and 59, I'm telling you, you're a thoughtful person. You would enjoy that. But it's a little bit of a philosophy or a set of therapeutic techniques. that organize and make sense of the world, and people tend to create meanings out of these events that we experience, the meanings and the understanding of the world and the messaging that we take when we're just operational, right? Those stories are really, really important. You know what drives me nuts, Matthew? People talk about how, oh man, I don't want to tell my story. Nobody wants to hear that. They don't want to, it's happened so long ago. Why do I need to tell the story about my dog? I mean, come on, right? Have you ever heard people say about, kind of go that way? I don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear about my experiences.
Sure, we probably all have experiences like that. We don't feel like it's significant enough to tell the story or share it with anyone.
In the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, they go and they do a speaker meeting, and it's the first time they may tell their whole elongated story of what they've been through their drinking and drugging history. And then they do it again. And then they do it again. And then they do it again and again. And if you spend any time in the program, you may be the speaker at a speaker meeting 10 times. And do you know on the 9th time who it helps the most?
The speaker.
Right. Same thing on the first time and the 10th time, by the way. But yeah, every single time they're getting more and more out of redefining that story, tweaking that story, re-understanding pieces of that story, remembering more of the story. It's amazing. So what we do in working with people in this kind of a model is we're really looking at, okay, stop there in that part of the story. I've heard that part before, but what did that, here's a therapy question. I think I said this recently. What's that mean to you? So I might ask you, you asked me, so what does it mean the next time you take a drive? I might ask you, what does a dog mean to you? I'm not asking you now, but, because this is not to deliver therapy services in any way. Right? But if I ask that, what does a dog mean to you? Mm-hmm. And you didn't really think about it and just gave a quick answer, we don't know what comes up from that. Mm-hmm. But if you go through that story and you say, wait a minute, okay, you were how big at that time? And how big are you now? So your adult body's a little different than a dog. Matter of fact, that dog might run from you now. He ain't want no part of you. Very realistic, right? Mm-hmm. You can reframe the story and characterize it in what it means to you now dramatically differently. Mm-hmm. What did your dad do to you when you were little? What did you experience with that? You tell that story over again. And then you begin to see it. Wait a minute, my dad wasn't that bad of a guy. He may have had, wait a minute, I remember about that time now. I'm an adult and I'm thinking back. Didn't they go through bankruptcy? Yeah. And you add a piece to the story and you re-understand, wait a minute, my dad was stressed the hell out when he did that to me, and he was worried about being able to put food on the table. It's a new understanding, isn't it? See how we revisit those things? It's funny. You ever hear the phrase "rip the Band-Aid off"?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what's the concept there?
If it's going to be painful, just get it over with. Right.
But I'd rather leave the bandage on, and I don't want to look at it. Why do I want to go back to my story? Am I answering that question? Because you're going to be able to go through it, add pieces, re-understand it, redefine it. Like literally your story becomes a different story. The 6th time you tell it, right? I've told that snow story multiple times. The facts don't change from what I recall, but my experience of it has changed. And I now focus on those safety statements that I said to myself. Because the first few times I told that story, I didn't realize how important that part of it was. Now I'm kind of realizing that's what I want to highlight, because that was really effective for me. And I calm down and enjoy the rest of the drive. So that's a little bit about what we do in therapy with people. We need to taxi in for a landing here, I think. Does that seem hopeful enough for people that have lived in poverty? Does that seem hopeful enough for, well, you mentioned the NBA player, right? Was he successful at redesigning his life with the shoes that he didn't even have money enough to wear? I mean, does this message seem hopeful enough here towards the end about what you can actually do to help yourself? curious.
Well, I think so. I mean, once you realize that, some of the experiences you've gone through, they do frame who we are, they shape who we are. But if there are scars that we have, or if it's influencing our life today, there are ways that we can work around that.
Very direct ways that you could think about that. If I'm doing constructivist work with somebody, I might even have them literally write out on 3, 4, 5 pages their story, and they come in and they read it. We go through it. I might, a few months later, have them do the same thing. And I'm telling you, man, the words are different. The way that they make statements can be different. It's really, really cool.
Yeah.
To watch somebody go from the world is a dangerous place and I can't trust anybody and I don't want anybody to know that I came from a family like that.
Mm-hmm.
Literally metamorphosizing over to this family experience made me a strong man today, and I understand in a compassionate way people that are struggling, and it has enabled me to give people an uplifting view that you can absolutely learn trusting people.
Mm-hmm.
How do you go from that to that?
Night and day.
And I've seen that. I've literally, the blessing of my work is I get to watch that process happen. I can't tell you how cool it is when that goes on. So
Got to be very fulfilling.
It's pretty neat. So let's get out of here, man. Taxi in. Questions you have, thoughts that you have, I'll tell you where we're going next. Ever realize you have as many emotional concussions? Now you're going to go home and wonder, holy crap, I've been concussed.
Well, it's an interesting concept. I mean, each one of these shows, I've been fortunate enough to be with you the last 3 of the podcast, and I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for the invite, and I appreciate the opportunity. I think maybe it's benefited me as much as anybody, like you said, who tell your story, and you're the one that benefits. So being here and talking through some of these, we've had some very interesting topics. But I think overall, it's thinking about, it's an interesting concept. I mean, emotional concussion.
Mm-hmm.
Never would have considered such a thing if we hadn't have sat here and recorded this podcast and discussed that topic and discussed all the ways that it can impact us.
Good deal. Yeah, no, absolutely. I appreciate that. And I really, we're going to do a high five here. I just decided we're going to do that because you shared with the dog anytime that someone's on a show and they share courageously anything that they've been through, because that's not easy to do. You need to have to do that. So a high five just signifies good job. Appreciate that. Next week, we are going to talk about homelessness. And like I said, I think the title that I developed is, homelessness affects us all. And we're going to have a guest on there. So I'm going to talk with a lady named Ann, and she's going to hang out with us. So you're gonna bless us with your presence again in a few months or so. Is that still the plan?
Stay in touch.
All right,
Let us know.
Let's do a high five here, and we will see you guys next week. Take care. We missed.